My office launched the Hub City Hero program this year to showcase members of our community who selflessly and steadily give their time and their talents to improve the lives of others. Many citizens every month are nominated, and so please welcome Steve Beverly, the one and only, our Hub City Hero for June. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott.
So there's a lot to tell, and so I guess in a condensed version, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, goodness. Of course, I've lived in Jackson for 31 years after going all over the Southeast in television news, and it was an interesting journey there. And I'd never even heard of Jackson, Tennessee, when I was called one day and said there's a news director's opening at WBBJ in Jackson, and would you be interested? And at that time, I never even heard of Jackson, as I mentioned. And so I came up and ultimately took the job. And 3 years later, a job came open that was, I had no idea that it would ultimately be my dream job, but to be able to mentor young people as a broadcast journalism educator at Union University. And it was the best job I ever had. And 28 and a half years later, they finally decided they'd had enough of me and I'd retire. But in all seriousness, to be able to work with young people who have dreams like I did when I got into TV news 45 years ago in Columbus, Georgia, which was one of my two hometowns. And so it's been a journey that sometimes when you're in TV news, you're migrant. But the fact that we were able to be here as long as we have, it allowed us to make a real home in this community. And that's been a real joy.
Fantastic. It's a long career and a lot of giving back. And so I know through teaching is, I well know teachers give much more than those classroom hours to their students. But you've also given back in various ways, like through your West Tennessee Today. And so I guess really tell us about two things: giving back, what leads you to give back so much, and then what about local news intrigues you?
When it comes to giving back, I think this should be true in any community, but especially for those of us who have had a job of a public nature. And everywhere I went, it goes back to when I was a senior at the University of Georgia, and my professor, Bill Martin, he didn't lecture us. He just flat out told us for advice. He said, no matter what you do in this profession, always give back, because he said people are investing their time in you by the mere fact that they will watch you. And he said, never get to a point that you minimize when somebody comes up to you and says, I watch you every night, etc., like that. He says, always be gracious to them and acknowledge the fact that, they've given their time to you. So you give back to any community you've been in. And I've always tried to do that wherever I have been. I'm a people person. I love people. And part of that, I think, comes from my father being a pastor, and he was beloved in South Georgia. He was unofficially known as the Bishop of Waycross, Georgia. And so I gained a lot of that in the genes from him. But that's been so important to me, because if you're going to do this kind of work, you got to love the cities that you're in. Yeah, they're not perfect, and I've lived in 8 different cities in the Southeast. They're not perfect, but they are, they're full of people that have so much that they give to you. But Mayor, I would also say this: when it comes to news, I really started out wanting to be the All-American sportscaster. And I did play-by-play sports of high school games for 7 years before I actually graduated college. But I had a professor, Bill Martin again, who said that based on my college work, he said, if you want to go into sports, that's fine. But he said, you really have a talent for news. And generally, if Bill told you something like that, you paid attention to it. And so that's where I broke in Columbus in 1976. I've seen local news change immensely, primarily because of technology, because we couldn't go live from anywhere in town when I first started. We didn't even have a teleprompter, so we were the old-fashioned look down and look back up at the copy. But we've seen so many changes, and now to be able to take a telephone and go live anywhere at any time. And so one of the things that I had to learn through those changes is how to adapt to the technology. And that particularly was so with students, because you don't want to train them for yesterday. You want to train them for tomorrow. And for me, I think anybody who goes into it, you've got to have an inquisitiveness about the community that you're in. You got to care about it. And so for me, that has been the thing that's been so important, getting to know the people who lead a community, but also getting to know Joe and Mabel who are at home, the average person, because they're affected by the decisions that are made in every community. So it's a two-way street in the way we report local news.
It's a great segue into the next question is, what's the difference between your method of sharing news versus other news outlets?
Particularly when we started training students and we shifted to a digital platform of West Tennessee Today back in 2018. And because if you go online, you can look at just about any television station in America, and they have a digital platform where they're going live. It used to be that you wait until 5 or 6 o'clock and you hold the story, and unless it's something where you've got, say, a fire raging downtown, you held it until those times. But now people want it on demand right now. If something is happening, let's just say if we've got a city council meeting going on, if it's a school board meeting, not everybody has, using Jackson as an example, not everybody has Jackson Energy Authority cable that does provide those opportunities. So it is a chance to be able to teach my students in so many ways by example, how to be able to report on the fly as you're going. And it's, I think for me, the many years that I spent in sports, because I did union basketball for 25 years, and because you don't work with a script in a case like that, you're telling a story as it happens. And I think anybody who has done sports really has an advantage doing live reporting of news, because you're telling a story as it happens. And so that's the kind of thing that we've tried to spend, and I incorporated into my curriculum for young people to actually have live experience, and we would do things so that they could get that opportunity to learn how to do it on the fly. And so that's only going to be more and more demanded as young people go into the field.
So if people are interested in giving back, and whatever that may be, through telling stories, through news, to the community, what words of wisdom would you give them? I'm sure you've given words of wisdom to countless students. So kind of share some of those words of wisdom.
Do it with integrity. That's number one. This is so important, and I think it has been lost in our contemporary age in many instances, because sadly, on a national basis, there is a distrust of media that it's terribly unfortunate, because if you have distrust of the people who are trying to impart the information, then that leads to all kinds of chaos in communities, and people getting the wrong information, and sometimes exaggerated information. I saw this happen during the pandemic. You have too, when you've been doing your Wednesday or Thursday afternoon situations, that people will come on, and it's outrageous, some of the things that they will post online. But if you're going to be in a position where people depend on you for accuracy is to do everything possible to get the story right. It is so much more important to be right than it is to be first. Pressures of the medium have placed the demand to be first all too often more important than being right. But I think that is so essential to do it with integrity, but also when you're telling stories, do it so that the person at home can understand it. A lot of times when we cover organizations or we cover government entities, a lot of times there is jargon or abbreviations or acronyms that are used that are very common to them, but the folks at home don't know what they mean. So you've got to do a better job of explaining it. And I think also that it's very important for newcomers to any community. We have people who move to Jackson all the time. And when newcomers come to town, sometimes we have a fault of assuming that everybody knows what has happened going from point A to point B. And I think it's very important for any young person who goes into the field is to keep a notebook so that you can remember, not just trying to call it up from upstairs, but keep a notebook to remember, okay, this happened here. All right, then today, 6 months later, here is where we are, because that does a marvelous job of putting stories in perspective for the people at home who want that information, and especially for newcomers to the community, is do it in a fashion so they can understand what people who have lived here a long time already understand.
Those great words, and I think there's no question that you have provided those stories and those news with integrity and perspective for as long as I can remember, at least. And so we appreciate all your service to young people, to the community, to providing news and telling stories. So thank you so much. If you are interested, you're watching, and nominating a Hub City Hero, visit our hero.jacksontn.gov. Recipients are selected monthly, and after a year of Hub City Heroes have been recognized, one hero will be selected and awarded $1,000 to donate to a charity of their choice. So Steve, thank you so much for all you do for our community, and congratulations again on being June's Hub City Hero.
Well, I'm very honored and humbled by this, and I appreciate it very much, Mayor Conger.